Welcome to another episode of HKEX Voice, our podcast series featuring insights from our senior executives on Hong Kong's financial markets. I'm your host, Jeffrey Young. As a regulator, HKEX is committed to driving robust governance and compliance culture in our markets and has recently revised its enforcement policy statement to enhance its enforcement regime. Today, we are very pleased to have John Witz, HKEX's head of enforcement, to talk about HKEX's approach to enforcement, why it is important to the market, and what it means for the future. John leads a team within the listing division that investigates possible breaches of listing rules and takes appropriate regulatory action. Welcome to our podcast, John.
Thank you.
Let me start with the first question that I think many of our listeners would like to understand. Why is enforcement so important to the integrity of our market?
It's really, at its heart, all about market quality. We've got a good set of rules governing our listing framework, but if there's no consequence for breaching those rules, then they can't work. So what we want to try and do is drive good conduct and make sure that corporate governance can be raised sort of across the board so that we've got a very good, strong, fair market.
That's fascinating. Where are we now at the enforcement journey?
Well, the journey is one, of course, that never stops. There's always work to be done. But what we have seen over the last couple of years is a real time of enhancement. We've really reflected on the way we go about doing our enforcement work. And we've looked to improve in various ways. We're using some technology more to help try and detect potential areas of concern. And we're looking at the way we go about doing our work to try and make sure it's as efficient as possible. But some of the most significant changes that we've made and some of the areas where we've concentrated the most effort in the last couple of years have really been on our connection with all our stakeholders and with our communication with them.
Right.
So, amongst other things, we've upgraded our website, but more importantly, we're looking at the content that's within that. We're looking at all the words that we say and the way that we can communicate them to people. Because if we've got these lessons to learn from our enforcement action, they're only useful if people are actually listening to them and learning from them. And so within that, we've changed a number of different things. We've changed the way that we publish our enforcement sanctions to try and make sure that the lessons can be drawn out more readily. We've also looked at all of our guidance materials, and we've got a number of guidance materials that you can find on the website, and they include our enforcement policy statement, which is actually, I would say, probably one of the most important items in there to help explain to people what we do and what our current priorities are.
So last year, the exchange revised its enforcement policy statement for the first time in a number of years. What are you trying to achieve with the updated revised statement, and what is the new approach?
Yeah, so the policy statement, as I say, it serves two purposes, really. The first purpose is really to explain to people what we are, what we do. It sets out our role, our objectives, a little bit about how we work. If someone wants an introductory guide to our enforcement work, that is the first place to go and have a look. The second part of it is to communicate as clearly and as transparently as possible to everyone what our current enforcement priorities are. And there are three of those. Responsibility, we have controls and culture, and then the third one is cooperation. And perhaps I could just say a little bit about what they mean.
Sure.
With responsibility, what we're really trying to emphasize as one of our priorities is that the people who are in positions of responsibility at listed issuers understand that responsibility and they embrace it. We have a particular focus, of course, on directors, and it's about what they understand that they know they need to do as part of their duties. Having this privilege, but also this burden, they have work to do being in a position of control in this regulated environment. So that's something we really want to make sure gets across to the directors in particular, but also to the people that support them. The second area, controls and culture, pervades so much of what we look for when we need to do an investigation, and what we hope for, of course, across all the listed issuers. Every issuer needs to be set up with a robust and effective risk management and internal control framework. They need to have the right oversight in place, and they need to have the right culture within the company. People need to know that they are empowered to speak up when they see things going wrong, and that they have the right channels to escalate concerns, and that there are procedures and processes in place to make sure that the right approvals are obtained and the rules are followed. The third priority that we have is almost a standalone one, and that's cooperation. That very much relates to how we work with issuers and with directors, and it speaks for itself. But we want to make it very clear that there's no room for people not to cooperate. When the regulator comes calling, we need to be able to hear from them, because it's only with that we can all work together to ensure that the market works effectively and fairly.
John, last year the exchange consulted and also implemented some changes to the listing rules with regards to enforcement. Could you elaborate a bit about these enhancements and how this will help in your enforcement work?
Yes, of course. So I would say probably the most important enhancement that came through following that consultation and the rule change was to make sure that we've got a sufficiently wide range of sanctions available, so that when we see different kinds of conduct and different kinds of misconduct in our regulatory actions, we can make sure that the right sanction is given for each of the different levels of culpability or wrongdoing that we see. And what we've particularly done there is at the top end of the range of sanctions. Our sanctions are primarily reputational sanctions. They are statements of our view on a conduct that we have seen. And what we've done is included at the top end there a new statement called a director unsuitability statement, which we think leaves absolutely no room for doubt as to what we think about what we've seen. And that's reserved for the most serious misconduct, of course. But by introducing that gives us a much better range to be able to use in each case.
John, what are the most concerning issues that you've been seeing in your enforcement work, and what lessons can we derive from that?
I would say there are probably three main areas that jump to mind in terms of issues of concern. One is really to do with about making sure that the appropriate information is given to the market. So many of our rules are about disclosure. They're about making sure that the right information is shared with the market so that everyone has a fair and level playing field. And so much of what needs to be done to comply with those rules is to make sure that there aren't important pieces of information that get buried somehow. So it's quite a broad issue, but anything around making sure that the right information gets detected, identified, and then announced to the market is I'd say, a sort of critical importance. A second area that I think is worth mentioning is anything to do with really substantial payments out of the company. We've seen cases in which there are payments out that don't appear to have been properly considered, or at least sufficient safeguards haven't been put in place before that money left. Sometimes it could be something, for example, just a loan, and there hasn't been any real due diligence, or there hasn't been proper security taken, a real thought given as to how that money could be got back if things go wrong. And sometimes it's a transaction where money's gone without anything coming back in return. The third thing I would say is to make sure that every issuer keeps its house in order. Now, that's a very broad statement. There's a lot of things that could cover. But what I mean by that, it's going back to my point about having a very good control framework, good internal controls, good risk management, good oversight, and making sure that that's maintained.
Indeed. John, how do you see your enforcement work evolving over the next couple of years?
I think we'll see more use of technology. We'll certainly look to see how we can use that to try and make sure that things are working as well as possible on the inside. On the outside, I'd like to see more of what we've been doing over the last couple of years. I want to see an extension of our connection with all the stakeholders. And by that, what I mean is really focusing on the positives that enforcement work can bring. A lot of it is through our sanctions, but why are we doing it? We're trying to drive good conduct. We're trying to improve market quality. And we want to be able to help people. If you look at our objectives, they do talk about educating. They do talk about enhancing corporate governance. And so I'd like to see what more we can do by way of providing the guidance and support to people who are out there who are on our side. They want that good market. They want their issuer to be great. And they want to know what more that they can do. And so by more communication, by more engagement through the materials that we publish, I want to see how we can keep that journey going and get more and more out there to give that support and guidance. Because if we do that, if we can work with all the other stakeholders, then together, we all can then lift that bar, lift that market quality, give that corporate governance, give the confidence to investors, and really just make sure that Hong Kong is the market and secure in its place as one of the top international financial centers.
Fully agree with that, John. On that note, thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to learn about our enforcement efforts and what this means for our market. So thank you, John.
Thank you.
For all our new listeners, if you want to learn more about this podcast or HKEX's markets, please visit us at our website at www.hkex.com.hk. From all of us at HKEX Voice, thank you for listening and keep an ear out for our next episode. So long.